Hello, welcome to Fireside Palaver. This episode is long, belated. We had a gap between now and the last episode.
Episode 20?
Episode 20. Yeah.
Is it? Yeah, I think it
so.
is.
I think so. So we're at like a milestone number.
I know, right?
Good round. 10 number.
Here's an explosion of balloons. Yay.
So this episode we're going to be finishing out Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson.
Look how giant that thing is.
I know, it is so big. And part 5 is even bigger.
I know, right?
They just get longer and longer. It's crazy. I can't, dude, these books are so outrageously long. And they're so good, but they're so long that by the time I get to the end of it, I don't even know what I read. I don't even remember the beginning anymore. They're so long. I was thinking today driving home, actually, thinking about getting ready for this podcast and just trying to recap everything that happened in this book. I started watching like recap videos. They're bringing up stuff that I don't even remember reading. It's been so long. I'm like, was that this book? Thought that was Words of Radiance.
Right.
And the thing is like, damn, I had a string of thought there and I totally lost it. Oh, I know what it was.
Okay.
The reread value, I think, of this. Like, I think if I were to go back and read The Way of Kings now, it would be a completely different book.
Yes.
100% different. I'm not ready to do it like right now, but I think that whenever book 5 comes out and we read it and we feel like we've absorbed it, I'm going to go back and read Way of Kings.
Definitely. Well, every time one of the new books comes out, you're either going to have to read a Cliff Notes version or go back and read it because there is so much stuff. Like, I can't imagine. Yeah. I think we figured out it was every 4 or 5 years that he's coming out with these books, sort of. So like, I'm not going to remember anything about these books when 6 comes out.
I think this was 2 years ago, and there's still, and then book 5's not until next year. So we'll have been 3 years.
Right. And we were talking about podcast stuff. The sheer size of these books is not exactly podcast friendly, but unless you're doing it full time every day.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's so many characters, so much stuff happening, and it's all awesome. Like, this book was awesome. And each chapter you go along, it's like, wow, that was freaking great. Wait, I gotta, like you said, I want to talk about that. And then you hit the next chapter and it's like, wow, that was freaking great. I want to talk about that. And then we'd be here as long as the book, reading, if we went over every part of this book. Like,
I need a way to keep notes as I'm reading, but I switch back and forth between audiobook and Kindle. So, and then I buy the physical copy, which I think is hilarious. I'm buying the book in every form possible. So So with me, like, the last 2 Dark Tower books. Oh yeah.
I've physically read like the book, and I would keep my phone with me. And when I came across something cool, I'd have a Google Doc open. I'd make a note about it.
Yeah.
But this book, I listened to completely. I didn't read it at all. And I can't really do that driving, down the road.
Exactly.
And so something cool happened, and I'll be like, I need to remember that, and then I totally forget it. And so it just makes it a little bit more difficult. But
that's
it's so good. I retain. I don't retain the details, but the overall greatness. I know that stuff. So, and anytime you have especially if the book was this long, but was only about 6 or 7 characters, it would probably be easier. But just going over this chapter summary, I'm looking at there's 12 different characters in one chapter, and you're like, good grief.
We need like Agent Cooper, where we have this little tape recorder that we pull out.
Right. Exactly.
And we just driving down the road, you get a good idea, you hear something good, you pause the audiobook, pull out the tape recorder, make a note, put it back, start the audio.
Well, I mean, I always forget that I can just say, "Hey Google, open Docs," and then tell it what to lead. And like,
I've never done
we have
that.
the technology, but
yeah, I got to figure out. The Kindle has a note like thing, and I have actually used it for part 1 and part 2 of Rhythm of War. I did take some notes, and I think I even used those in the episode, but I don't do it enough. I don't.
Right.
I don't do it enough, and I didn't do it at all. So I listened to. So this is the reason why we're finishing out the book too, and the reason why there was a gap, because recently I drove to Florida and actually went on a cruise. And driving to Florida, I listened to the book all the way there and all the way back. And then whenever I got on the cruise ship, there was nothing to do but lay down and read, which is exactly what I wanted to do on vacation. So it was fantastic. But I ended up reading like the whole last half of the book. Whenever I got back home, I just had like a few chapters to read. And then I was telling you, I basically was like drained. Like I didn't read again for a week, but then I finished it yesterday. So
how with the drive did like Becca get into it, and then she's like, I got to figure out the end thing, or did she just put in headphones and drown you out?
I would have loved for that to happen. So the only chapter I listened to, which was the end of part 3, driving to Florida, my mom and Becca listened to the chapter where Kaladin like dives into the well and then like almost drowns and end up coming out the other side. We listened to that chapter together, and I could tell they were into it. Like they were like really quiet and like following along. And then on the way home, Becca and I were in the car, and we were listening to the chapter where Navani is being stabbed by Moash, and then she takes the oath or whatever, and she says, journey before destination, you bastard,
Yeah.
Becca heard that part and she was like, damn.
Right.
I was like, dude, funny. Yeah, but actually we all listened to different things with headphones the whole drive there. So the car was silent, and Elliot's watching his tablet, watching something. My mom's listening to some other book, probably like some kind of romance novel or something. And Becca's listening to The Office, whatever the Office podcast is with
Jenna Fisher and what's her name? Yeah.
So we were all listening to something different the whole drive there. But yeah, I killed like the last half of the book. So we tried to do, so we got together 2 days ago, just for the listeners, and we were going to try to do part 3 only. But like it's impossible to talk about part 3 now that we've read the rest of the book. And so it would just be, we either have to pretend like we haven't read it yet, and that would just be disingenuous, or the whole time we would just be spoiling the rest of the book.
Right. So. Well, like you said, I don't know what came where, so I'd be talking about stuff from part 4 and 5 and have no clue.
So this is going to be the remainder of the book. And the best way I think that it's worked out for us in the past is to sort of make a character list, and then we kind of go over each character's story. Yeah.
Right.
Which, one thing that, in part 3, they basically don't touch on Adolin and Shallan like at all.
I know, right? It kept going and going and going. I was like, what happened to them? And I was like, man, I hope he's just not forgot about him. Because like that whole storyline I really got into in part 2.
Yeah.
And then like I was, because I think we talked about like our guesses and stuff for what was to come, and one of the big things was we were talking about Adolin and Shallan, and I was like, I want to see if we're right. And then they just never mentioned them, and I was like, crap.
Hey, that's a good thing to bring up. So whenever they do finally rejoin them in part 4, so we had predicted that Shallan, I remember and there's a moment where I thought my prediction was coming true, and I was kind of let down. I predicted that Shallan was going to be some sort of like sleeper agent, that she's secretly been a member of the Ghost Bloods like her entire life, and she's been trained from a child to be like an assassin, and she's just waiting for someone to say Rosebud, and then she kicks into action.
Right, exactly. The Manchurian candidate.
Right, exactly. And there's the moment in Shadesmar where she thinks that the guy that only comes out like every Thursday or something like that.
Right.
She thinks that guy is the guy that Moraes is telling her to find. And she like sneaks up on him and she like pulls out a dagger. And I was like, oh crap, I was right. Oh no. Because I said on the podcast, I said that would be a bridge too far. Like if that's what it happens to be, I'm kind of checked out. And so I really thought, reading those chapters, reading those pages, I was like, oh no, I've cursed it. Like I shouldn't have said that. But as it turns out, we find out who Formless is.
Well, my prediction was Formless was the real Shallan.
That's true.
The whole time.
That's true.
And that Shallan was just another, character that she's created. And it, in a way, it kind of is, but Formless was basically just Shallan's memories, like that she'd been pushing down and that were trying to resurface. And Shallan was Shallan all the time. It's just,
Shallan started speaking as Formless at the end of those chapters. She was like really cold. And
she couldn't stand.
It was like it was pattern. Almost. She was like mean to Pattern.
She was mean to Pattern.
She was almost like a ruthless, more cutthroat, like super dark version of Vale.
No feelings. Yes.
Yeah. And the way I kind of interpreted that, which by the way, you were way closer to being correct than I was. But the way I interpreted that was like, almost like Vale was Yasna's way of kind of doing things that are not Yasna. I'll cut all that out. Vale was Shallan's way of kind of doing things that that Shallan wasn't comfortable doing, and so she made up this character Vale. Well, but she still had there was still an element of Shallan there. There was still
right.
Whereas like Formless, I think was like Shallan is like deleting herself and is just like giving in to like, I'll just give into the darkness. Like I will just do, whatever it takes, and so I think that she was kind of faced with a choice of like, well, do I give into that or do I, become stronger? And we even predicted that whole storyline with Vale and Radiant would have to come to a head in this book. And
I think, didn't we say we thought that eventually they would split into 3 different unique people?
Yeah. Brandon Sanderson definitely did exactly the opposite of what I said he would do.
Right.
I didn't think that he would be brave enough to actually kill off the character of Vale.
I know, right?
But he did in a very satisfying way. What did you think of that
Exactly.
scene?
I enjoyed that part. I really enjoyed. And, it's interesting that, talking about, the different aspects of her and what Formless was and everything. Like, so like all throughout since Radiant and, Vale have come out, like, especially with the Vale character, like she would realize, that, I think they were talking about, you can learn like how to be a better spy and blah, blah, blah. And, Vale would be like, but, you already know this because I am you.
Right.
And the same thing with like Radiant was like, she's not holier than thou, but she's radiant.
Yeah.
And Shallan thought she wasn't herself. Shallan wasn't good enough to be radiant, but she is radiant.
Right.
And the same thing with Formless is like, Formless was a emotionless, like do whatever it takes, like regardless of consequences type thing. She wanted to protect Aelin, was even going to go so far as to carry out the killing of that guy. Well, I forgot what his name is now, but and damn the consequences. But those are the three aspects or four aspects of her true self. And I think I think Vel realized that, even though the character Vel goes away, Vel is still there because she is Shallan. And that just kind of like Vel kind of, or Shallan sort of absorbed Vel back into herself. And I think he even makes a reference to like, that's going to eventually happen with Radiant, but for now she's still there. And I think she basically absorbs Formless into her, again. And I think that, she's coming back to being like this whole person again. And I thought the ending of this was really good when she confronts Mraize about everything.
Yeah.
And we talked about before how the first 5 books are basically like one story, and then the next books will be sort of a different thing. And I think that part is setting that up, because even from Dawnshard to this, the Cosmere and the greater universe is becoming more and more prevalent.
Oh yeah.
And the Ishar, the guy that with Dalinar, talking about how he's trying to get back to a different planet. He wants to get off this planet, and all these different planets are coming into,
and Kalak was the character. Yeah, so he mentions to Shallan whenever she confronts him, towards the end of her section, that he's just trying to get off Roshar. Like, he's just trying to get on other worlds, and whatever way he can,
because he knows a greater war is coming. And that's the thing too with we'll get into the other characters, but with the whole thing with Dalinar, you realize that what's happening on Roshar is like a blip in this grander war for control of the Cosmere, essentially.
I think it's crazy that out of all the Sanderson books, we read Stormlight Archive first. We've not read Mistborn or anything else, and it seems like this is like the Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, this is the one where everything comes together. It is much bigger than the other pieces, and I am dying to go read all of his other books, but I've already picked up Elantris, and I have the Mistborn, the first trilogy. But yeah, I want to read everything in this universe now. I don't want to do it back to back, but I want to eventually. I want to touch on Mistborn. It's so the stakes now seem extremely high, and I'm wondering how different it's going to feel when book 6 comes out. Or at the end of book 5, are we going to realize, like, oh man, all the problems we were worried about right now are like actually nothing in the grand scheme of things.
Right. Shallan too, in her investigation, I guess, as far as what Mraize's, real reasoning is to be doing all this stuff. Like, I'm interested in him. Like, up until now, you just think he's just like this ghost blood leader that, is just some guy that's maybe like a political pawn type person that's, behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But now, like, you know, that he is, and he says there's people above him, but obviously he is not just a Malethi, or I think he's supposed to be a Lethi, but he's obviously not a Lethi. And now I want to know who he is more. And
do you think that the Ghost Bloods on Roshar? So we know that from Wit and from what Shallan's figured out, Ghost Bloods are like across multiple worlds, but that doesn't necessarily mean that
that they came from a different world.
Right, exactly. They could be somehow recruiting across worlds, but
right. That's why I think Mraize is someone who is probably from that planet, but there's somebody that really early on that they've, you know, they recognized something at some point and brought him into the fold. And, you know, there's probably a Mraize on each one of these little planets that are pushing buttons behind the scenes.
Yeah, he's middle management for this.
Yeah, he's definitely middle management. He's the Michael Scott of Roshar. But the whole the other thing that we had talked about with the Adolin and Shallan, the prediction that we had was that Maya was going to be the one to save the day, and we were right about that essentially.
Yeah.
And that was really cool. Like the whole
that,
you know, she's trying to talk, and then like she screams at that guy. Like
I was really digging those parts, reading those parts.
Oh, I was too.
I was really invested into and again, it was one of those things where I was like, oh man, I'd really love to talk about this on the podcast. And now I think back on it, and just so much happens in that section. But like, you know, there was a lot of debate in those chapters where I was kind of going back and forth. Like, obviously I wanted Adolin to succeed in his endeavor, but at the same time, I did sympathize with what they were saying, and I could see how it paralleled to other things in the world. But it just kept getting worse and worse for Adolin. Like it seemed like it just kept getting worse and worse. But then Maya was like the key piece that ended up kind of flipping everything else. Like all the pieces came together once she said that they chose.
That was intense right there. Like, and that's really cool that like, cause you know, the whole, up until that point, it's, you know, the Radiants killed their Spren and what like, this huge betrayal and all that stuff.
And then the biggest question coming out of that is what would be so severe that they would choose to do that. And of course, Maya can't remember, but she conveniently can't remember. I don't know
if I was going to say, you know, he doesn't really answer the question. Like, and the other thing too, like, you know, the whole thing is like all the others, the Deadeye Spren started showing up, at the castle, and they all, the honor Spren are all like, yeah, see all these Spren are coming because they know you're getting ready to be judged, and they want their revenge, and they want to see, you know, you go down. But and the same thing with Maya, they bring her on as a witness against Adolin because they think, you know, this is what y'all did, this is what you did, and you're using this poor, you know, Deadeye Spren for your gain. And the thing happens with Maya, but I also want to know, which he didn't really mention, what happened with all the Spren that were outside. Like when she's in there giving the testimony and screaming and saying, you know, all that, like, I want to know what, like, were they all outside screaming too?
Right.
Or, you know, something. And maybe he'll pick that up, you know, because they didn't really, you know, the end of the Adolin and Shallan thing.
Yeah, they're still
didn't really end. They're still there. So
lasting integrity. They're still
lasting integrity.
What a name for a building.
You're right. The one of the cool things about lasting integrity was the description of the interior, and all I kept thinking about was the MC Escher.
Oh
pictures where people are walking all along the different stairwells.
Oh yeah,
that was really cool. Like that. there's no up and down. It's just wherever you step is up, kind of, or whatever, or is down, and like. Yeah. I kept trying to wrap my mind around that when he was describing it, and I was like, "That's one of those technology things. I'm just going to go with it and be like, all right, I take your word for it."
Right? Yeah. So, 2 characters from those scenes in the courtroom that I want to get your take on is one, the like attorney character for Adolin. I can't remember her name.
The Inksprin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That kept saying like, "This is true," or whatever it is. This
is the way.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what she said, but her whole thing about she knew that like getting Maya on the stand would bring to light the truth. She didn't necessarily know that she agreed with Adolin.
Right.
But she just knew that if what Adolin is saying is true and his heart is truly in the right place, then this will bring that to light. And if he's totally full of crap and this is all bogus, then this will also bring that to light.
Right.
And I thought that was an interesting take on that character. I think some people might read it and interpret it as she was like on Adolin's side the whole time, but I really don't think that was the case.
The big surprising part of that is like the prosecution calls her as a witness against Adolin.
Yeah.
And he's like, "What? Like, you're my lawyer." And she's like, "Well, I think you're wrong." So like, you know, and
she basically says like, she's like, I don't know. They because again, their perception of like, so honor is based on what they perceive as honorable.
As honor, not necessarily what actually is honorable.
And then there's a question, David. What actually is honorable?
Exactly.
But they're like, oh well, an honorable person would like they would tell the truth even if their client, like even if it were against their client, like they would, like they just she will be just no matter what. Yeah.
And you know the whole sham of the trial was really like, you know, even from the very beginning when what's his name shows up, the judge Kalak.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, I mean, you're basically guilty. It's kind of just a formality, you know, we're just gonna, you know, this is just get through this. And you know, you can see like, I felt like in my mind, I could see every time one of these situations would come up, you could just see Aelin's shoulders droop down.
Yeah.
Like, oh
yeah. Oh, and you know, he talks about, this is just a brief thing that I just happened to notice yesterday when I was reading the last couple bits. He does his father's pose, whereas his hands behind his back and trying to present an air of thoughtfulness or something like that. Well, then in Dalinar's chapters at the end of the book, Dalinar does that same thing to Odium. He's in his internal monologue. He says that he's going to stand with his hands behind his back and just try to give off that air of thoughtfulness. And I was thinking, like, you know, that's where Adolin learned it from. The other character that I found interesting in those scenes in the courtroom was I can't remember her name, but she took care of all the Deadeyes, and she was sort of like the community keeper for them, and she was like completely against Adolin. But what I liked about the way Brandon Sanderson told the story was after everything came to a conclusion, I just felt like, and I'd have to go back and find like examples, but I felt like that character was written in such a way that like she still did a really honorable thing. Like she was still doing she was still a good character for taking care of the Deadeyes. And it wasn't like she was written that because she was against Aelin, she's like obviously like a bad character. I thought that was handled really well, but I'd have to go back and look at the specifics.
I was trying to find her name. I can't find it right off the bat.
She's like only in those few chapters.
Right. Another thing that we forgot to mention, but we haven't mentioned yet, is that Shallan has now 2 Spren.
Oh yeah.
And that's very interesting too.
I saw some reviews whenever I went back and watched some stuff to get ready for the podcast today. There was some people that said, "Oh, I figured that out ahead of time." I
don't know how they figured that out.
I don't know how you would have. Yeah, I don't know how you would have figured that out. It completely caught me by surprise. Whenever Adolin first meets the recent Deadeyes at the market or whatever in Shadesmar, never did it cross my mind that that's what that was. I thought that was going to end up leading back to what was going on with the little the daggers that could suck up the souls and
stuff. Right.
I thought it was going to go back to that somehow, but in a million years I wouldn't have predicted that it turned out to be Shallan's long lost
right, and that's why Pattern doesn't know everything. And I thought that was really cool. Like like the fact that Pattern didn't or wouldn't say anything about her past, because it didn't really say he didn't remember. He just wouldn't talk about it.
It felt
and I don't know how you extrapolate that she had a different sprint from that.
I don't know.
Because to me, I thought it was just, and even in the book, it made it seem like Pattern. I mean, I still think he was trying to protect her. From her past, but he just knew that she had a different sprint,
right?
And I don't see how you could guess that at all. But now it's interesting. She's going to two-wield swords. That's going to be cool.
Yeah. So, but her other sprint is a Deadeyes, so she can summon a Shardblade.
And she can summon Pattern.
But wouldn't she hear the Shardblade screaming the way the other Radiants?
I don't know. That's right. Yeah. I didn't think about that.
I don't know, man. This is crazy.
Or maybe the Deadeyes are evolving so much now that's not.
Yeah, there's more to that story. There's something's going to happen there. I have a few predictions for the next book. We might be doing a two-parter here. Do predictions in another part, but I mean
and then of course the gist of what happens is that now Adolin has not all of the honor sprint are on board, but a good number now are willing to go back and
I remember now one of the things I liked that was written in this part was that there was this whole concept of while Adolin is winning over the hearts of some Spren, he is now a poster child. He's a target for this conflict, which is also just rallying the hearts of the other side of the conversation. I just thought that was a really elegant way for Sanderson to write that example into this story, and kind of a way I hadn't really thought about it. I like this whole section, but it's it really feels short-lived in the last half of the book, because basically
it did.
Yeah, they touch on it in this part, and then it doesn't come up again till the very end, and it's basically just to say, hey, they're all still alive, they're all still at lasting integrity, and we'll see them again in book 5.
and they've won over Spren to come bond with New Radiance. So but yeah, I mean whereas in this book is on a whole very different, because from the other books you had Kaladin as basically the main character, or Dalinar is basically the main character, and Adolin and Shallan were close to being main. I mean, I don't think they were. Shallan maybe, but the whole. But this book, I feel like Navani and Raboniel were the main characters of this book.
Navani and Raboniel is the reason I love this book.
And this is the reason I love this book too.
This book, I was so worried about Rhythm of War being my least favorite, and I was just going to have to suffer through it, because the title, Rhythm of War, I thought, it's just going to be, we're attuning to the rhythm of this and that and all that.
Yes.
And I knew that it was flashbacks of Eshonai and Vinley, and I was dreading the whole thing. I just said, I got to get through it. It's going to be good enough. and the whole story with Navani and Raboniel just completely, like, now this is my favorite Stormlight Archive book.
Mine too.
That relationship between those two characters and both of them. I mean, Raboniel is an extremely intriguing character, but this also made me really like Navani. Like this, that made the whole book for me. That was the best part of the entire book, was reading their sections.
100%.
And it's completely in the last half of the book. I mean,
right? It was basically part 3 through 5. What we just read is like they're coming together.
Right. And I mean, the best part of the first half of the book was whenever Raboniel and Vinley were like taking over the tower.
Right.
But I totally, before we get into, we'll talk about both, but I totally thought they're setting up for Dalinar to be the Blackthorn again. Like,
you're right. I get that feeling too.
And this is why Brandon Sanderson wrote this book and not me. But what I would have been setting up for was, okay, the tower, you no longer have radiant powers. You like, there's no more radiance. But guess what? The Blackthorn, Dalinar was the Blackthorn before he was ever radiant, you know?
Right.
So like, he's still going to go in there and bust some Singer skulls. You know what I mean? Like, he's still going to go in there and bust some Parshendi skulls. And they kept feeling like they were setting up for that. There's even the scenes where Dalinar is like telling Szeth, or he's telling the little general guy never turned out to be the guy.
He was awesome.
Dude, that was another weird thing. Why did they do that whole setup where I forget his name, the Minsk or whatever his name was?
The Mink.
The Mink. Why did they do that whole setup where the Mink was like, he's always hiding, sneaking off and hiding?
Yeah, I know, right?
And we were like, oh, that's definitely going to play a part later. Why would they even do that? It turns out he just did that just to do it.
I know, right?
Surely he wasn't setting up for book 5. Like in book 5, he's going to sneak off and hide somewhere. Knows? But you know, he's talking to the Mink, and he's like telling him, like, you know, it's weird being on the sidelines. I'm used to being in the battle, and he was kind of talking like he missed that a little bit. So I was like, man, he's about to bust up in Urithiru, and that never happened. That never happened.
He kept bringing up like, oh, we you know, there's something happening at Urithiru, and like there's problems here, and he's just, you know, at first he's just like, okay, you know, kind of like nonchalant, whatever.
Yeah.
And then like he begins to get more and more worried, and that's, you're thinking like, okay, so they're gonna go like he's gonna storm the place to figure out what's wrong. And I kept waiting and each time a section with Dalinar would come up, I'd be like, okay, here it goes. He's gonna go attack Urithiru, and then like he's just like, nope, I'm gonna go over here and meet this Roshar guy. And I was like, am I missing something? But like I'm so glad he didn't, because the Raboniel and Navani thing was so good.
So the Raboniel and Navani, like Raboniel, you keep trusting her even though she keeps letting Navani down.
Right.
Every time she does it in such a way that it's almost like she's helping Navani. Like, you know, sure, she like sort of like misleaded Navani into working on these scientific projects for her, but also she was like providing Navani what she needed for her to make these discoveries. Like this is what Navani wanted to do. Like, this was her goal, and Raboniel was giving her reason to do it, but then at the outcome, she was like, oh, you shouldn't be so naive. But yet I still kept, even as Navani as a character and even me as a reader, I kept still trusting her. Every time she set up another compromise, I would still trust that, she's going to do the right thing this time, you know? Because it seemed like Raboniel was like, and she outright says it, like she wants the war to end. In
any way possible.
Right. Yeah. She wants in any way possible. She wants the war to end. She doesn't believe it's likely that they could have like a peaceful outcome. She believes that it's probably better for her people if her side wins, but she just wants it to end.
Right.
And she just wants peace from that. And as long as Odium is there, she's never going to have that. And she doesn't believe the humans are capable of dealing with Odium.
Right.
which is like a perspective that like you can relate to, even though she's opposite Navani. Like it's still like you can relate to that perspective. Navani's almost in that same, situation. It's only slightly different. And yeah, I loved the back and forth there, and just the pursuit of knowledge, and like,
and them working together. Like the back and forth with them, and like, one of the cool things that and it's really interesting because he's been setting this whole thing up even from the early parts, the earlier books, is like Navani was always like, I'm just like a facilitator. Like I get, I'm the person that gets these smart people together to do these things. And like, she's like, I'm not really a scholar. I'm not really, I'm not on these people's level. But like, even up until the point where she gets with Raboniel, she's doing these amazing, like creating the floating platforms. Yeah. Like, even though that, yes, she does have scholars doing that, it's her. She's the one that's coming up with these designs, and she's helping. What's the handicap girl that has Cheery?
Oh my goodness.
She makes the floating chair for her, and the wheelchairs and stuff. And like, so like this whole time, she's looking down on herself, but he's showing that she is an actually very capable and very smart and very scholarly person. And then like that whole thing comes
imposter syndrome. Yeah.
Yeah. Like she, at the end, when she finally bonds the tower, the reason she can do that is because she finally says to herself, no, I am this person that I have been telling myself that I am not. Yeah. And she gains that self-awareness, that belief in herself. And, it kind of sucks that she had to, do what she did to Raboniel and by killing her. But like, and that was very surprising too when that happened, because I kept thinking that somehow they're going to work things out with each other, and somehow they're going to bond as far as like creating this front together to end things. And then like she takes the dagger and stabs her. I was like, wow, okay.
I would have found it believable if that had happened, but I like the way it played out.
I did too.
It was it fit Raboniel's like character so well. Like it fit Raboniel's like back and forth of like, Navani had to trick Raboniel to try to escape, and in doing so, she had to stab her with the special blade. But even after that, Raboniel's character ends up helping Navani whenever it comes to confronting Moash. And that, I just thought all of that played out just like so perfectly. Like it fit that relationship and that character so well. And it was like it was one of those like cinematic moments where it was just like, I could see this being a scene in a movie where, you stand up in the theater. Like this is like, I thought that played out so perfectly.
Yes.
And those moments are like what made the whole book for me. Like I loved all of that.
And she, as far as Raboniel, like, and part of the reasons too is I think they had great respect for each other. I think they worked well together, but in the end, Raboniel was still going to do everything she could to corrupt the sister,
sibling.
The sibling, and Navani knew, regardless, because I think Navani truly liked Raboniel and truly probably considered her a friend by the end.
Oh yeah.
But she knew that if Raboniel succeeded in corrupting the sibling, that it was over for the humans and over for the war. And so, she had to put that aside and say,
yeah,
regardless of what we've done together and all that we've accomplished, I still have to stop you. And I think on the flip side of that, I think Raboniel recognized that I think she knew that they were friends and they were colleagues and they were peers and all that stuff. But she 100% understood why Navani did what she did, and therefore wasn't bitter about her stabbing her. That therefore she helps with Moash and all this stuff, and then even Navani's like, you're just going to come back from this. And, Raboniel's like, no, I don't want to, because that was her end of the war. Her whole thing was, I want to end war because she's tired of this.
She's stuck in it.
And she's stuck in it. And that was her escape. She finally said, this is how I get to get out of this. And that was a pretty deep moment for me. I was like, wow, that was a little tear to the eye kind of thing.
Yeah, no, all that stuff was great. And she set up everything. She had Navani working on, that special gemstone, all because she was trying to find a way to give her daughter that escape too.
Yes. That was pretty poignant as well.
I remember she said, I always thought that I would be insane in the end or something like that. Like she was surprised that she got to leave with her sanity because of their situation where they're just trapped in eternity. Literally trapped in this war for eternity.
For thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
And the heralds kind of have the same curse, they're all insane. I just can't imagine what the next books are going to be like.
Right. There's been throughout these books, there's been a few moments, kind of like you were saying, though, you stand up in the theater and the whole, in the last part of the last book, when Kaladin does his thing and and then when Dalinar does his thing. In this book, for me, it's when Navani finally bonds with the sibling and Moash is right there, and it's he's just this bright light and Moash is almost like a vampire, go away, and I was like, hell yeah, I wanted to stand up and I'm driving the car and I'm smiling, I'm like, that's awesome, that was such a good part of the book.
That was definitely a nice climax to, and this was the fastest paced section of the book. Maybe the only section faster would have been whenever Raboniel's actually storming Urithiru.
Right.
But this section, it had those climactic moments that way, and it felt fast paced as if it were the end of Oathbringer. But in Oathbringer, Words of Radiance, and The Way of Kings, it was all these it all kind of followed a similar formula where they set up for this epic battle. They had this epic battle. Someone becomes even more radiant and shines more brightly, and then everything kind of crescendos out and then teeters off to the end of the book. Whereas this one, it had that same pacing, but it was completely different. It's all of this scholarly conversation and back and forth, and then it's a dark side of Raboniel. So I love the character so much, but she's so multifaceted. I believe, and I don't think it's ever said, but it's way more than implied, that she always knew why she was keeping the Radiance alive. That was always going to be an experiment for a way to kill Spren.
Yes.
And that is sinister.
It is. That is, and the other thing with that too is the whole thing with the melding, I guess you'd say, of the void light, and then
now there's void light, life light, and stormlight.
Stormlight. Essentially what they were doing was making a nuclear bomb.
I was thinking that too. This is exactly and
it's a god killer. It was a weapon to kill a god.
Yep.
And I thought that was really cool. And now it's out there. I mean,
yeah,
they know how to make it, or, Navani knows how to make it. So like, what's going to come of that? Like once Dalinar finds out this information, like how big of a change is that going to be? Like, because the as far as Dalinar's story, he's got this showdown with Odium
in 10 days.
In 10 days, is he going to have this nuclear hand grenade of light thing that he can just shove it in the chest and explode Odium or whatever? Like, that's the one thing about the next book. I'm like, is the next book basically going to be a 10-day period? And end with the war between Dalinar and Odium? Like, because it sets it up like that. Because I love the little beginnings of each chapter where they do like, this is a passage from Oathbringer or Rhythm of War or Storm or Way of Kings, and then he starts talking about this is L of the first day of the last
10 days,
and I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Like,
all right,
so that's got to be what this next book is like, because that's how it leaves off. Is Dalinar's like, what is Odium going to try to do in these 10 days to take over more territory before our battle comes?
We have so much that we haven't covered, but like, who do you think L is?
I know, right? I don't know.
So I saw somewhere. I'm scared to Google this.
And is it like, okay, since I obviously read it, is it just the letter L, or is it like ELL, or like?
Oh, it's the letter L.
Okay, it's the letter L.
To confirm, but I'm pretty sure it's the letter L. No, sure. Of course, I went to a Vinley flashback where they don't have the things.
Right.
Oh no, it is EL. Musings of L on the first of the final 10 days.
Musings of L.
And so I am not at all dissatisfied with recent events. Musings of L on the first of the last 10 days.
Elhokar.
Well, so all right. If you think back to the Way of Kings and Gavilar has Zeth write something in the... Isn't there something to do with L in that scene?
Cannot remember. It's definitely like... I mean, like, I kept trying to... The whole time they were... Each time one of those things would come up, I would think like, who was L? Who started with L? Who sounded like L? And I was like, well, there's Elhokar, but Elhokar's dead. Maybe it's a reborn Elhokar.
I swear there is some reference to that. Anyway, if there is, we need to do more Stormlight videos somehow, even when we're not reading the book. I don't know. Right. I don't know what we'll do, but I don't want to lose sight on this series while we're not reading it.
Right. Especially over at least a year.
At least another year. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would be down to talk more about this. But like the other thing I thought too was, so kind of jumping around a little bit. You got with Taravangian, he's thinking that he's going to be assassinated, and he's getting dumber by the day, all this stuff. And then when he basically becomes Odium, he is no longer Taravangian. He's Odium and Taravangian, and he's like a new character essentially. And I kept thinking, well, maybe this L is sort of like that. Maybe it's somebody who has gone through some sort of change because like each person that has been the writer of these different passages has done something, like, with Oathbringer, you knew that somebody was writing Oathbringer, but you don't realize till the end that it's Dalinar, and that the whole time he had learned to read and write and all this stuff. So I feel like Elle is somebody that is I mean, it could be somebody like Zeth that, like, because they keep hinting that, there's something big going to happen with Zeth, where like something has happened to a character and they've gone through some change. They've either reached a godlike status or something like that, and now they're writing down this tome of these last 10 days of whatever, mankind or whatever. Obviously we don't know what's going to happen, but like, and maybe it still has not yet happened because again, he hasn't let in, and well, most of the books at the very end, he lets in the reader know who the writer's been. But this time, there's nothing like that. So I think it's maybe like something that happened either that the day before the last 10 days when all this stuff happened with Dalinar, that somebody did something. Because it can't be a character that you don't know yet. It's got to be somebody that he has brought up already. Like, I can't imagine that he's just bringing out this new person and not without any kind of introduction. And so I who it is, I don't know. I mean, I've got my ideas, I think. But I mean, I'm not convinced in any way of what character it could be. I keep thinking it's maybe Renarin, but there was nothing in those things that said, it's oh look, it's obviously him, and I'm just, that's more of a guess, and maybe it's Taravangian. I don't know. It's weird, like but I thought that was very like out of left field thing with Taravangian, and basically what was Odium's real name? Rays. Like that whole thing where he's like, oh, Rays is he's gone crazy too, like just like the heralds, like he's lost sight of like
and
what's real.
It's a story of it's common in fantasy, but like it's like absolute power corrupts absolutely.
We know even what's her name, is it Cultivation at the end is like, hey, I chose you because you seem like a good guy,
right?
But the whole time in his mind, he's thinking, okay, I can wipe everybody out and do this, and all these extreme things. And she's like, oh, just don't let that in.
Yeah.
And that's how it usually starts. I'm sure when Ray's became Odium, he was probably the same way. Like, and it's just that power corrupted.
So Cultivation kind of did a similar thing with Taravangian that she did with Dalinar, where she like gave him something that would allow him to like lead to this moment, right. And she didn't know exactly what would happen, but she knew that like in this version of history, if she gives him this gift, or gift and curse in both cases, that it would somehow lead to this path, or it could lead to this path. And there could be other people in the world that she's given gifts/curses to that didn't lead to what she expected. But in these two cases, it did. And I think that she believes that Taravangian would not turn into what Ray's did.
Right.
But I think that ultimately there's just if anybody were given that power, then they would. I bet book 5 is going to turn out Dalinar is going to end up having to carry that weight, and maybe the villain of the last 5 books is Dalinar Kholin.
So like
the blackest Blackthorn.
Right. The agreement that Dalinar and Odium come to, is basically like, hey, so, you find out that there is this grander war through the Cosmere, and that there's basically a god on every planet, and they don't like each other, and they're all fighting for ultimate power. And I think it's similar on each one of these planets that like Odium is trapped on Roshar, that these gods are trapped on each one of these planets, and they're all trying to figure out a way to get off these planets. And, the main thing was keeping him stuck on the planet, right? So I think the gist of it is like, especially if Dalinar loses part where he becomes immortal and he becomes like a fused to lead his army essentially against these other planets. And somehow I feel like that is what's going to happen. I feel like Dalinar is going to become this, whether or not he wants to or not. And, kind of, you don't want to see it, but at the same time, as far as story goes, that would be like, I could see Dalinar like, there's probably some sort of oath gate somewhere that connects these planets together. Mm-hmm. And like, this oath gate opens and here comes the Blackthorn as a fused coming in to like, take over these worlds. And especially when that he's saying that the last 5 books are sort of a different story.
Yeah.
That's where I think it's going, is that it's going to go into a more of a cosmic thing, and it can't be that way if Dalinar wins. Like, yeah. Or at least I don't feel like it could be that way. So
I got an idea. My prediction is, so there's a part of me that thinks, and I don't know, Brandon Sanderson can make this interesting because he's a great writer, but I don't know how I would do it and make it interesting. But I think that there's still so much about the Heralds we don't know.
Yes.
And these characters are so fleshed out, like they are real characters. I can tell that Brandon Sanderson has thought about these characters' history and what they've done in their past, that they can't just be these like background things that are in the first 5 books.
Right.
I wonder if we're going to somehow get a conclusion to this whole Odium saga in book 5, but the last 5 books are going to be like prequels to these books, and they're going to be about those heralds and tell their story. But the problem with that is how do you end it? They all go crazy and they all fail. So like, how do you end that story and make it lead, make it end triumphantly? So like, I don't know, unless somehow they get to go back and like rewrite things somehow. I don't know. But
well, I mean, you've got, Dalinar's ultimate goal is to reform the Oath Pact.
Yeah.
And maybe by doing that, it brings, the heralds kind of back to some sort of sanity.
Well, at the end of this book, it's kind of comical in a way, but Dalinar kind of implies that like, hey, Kaladin, you're doing really good with the PTSD people. We got all these wild, radiants around that could use some mental stability. Right. Why don't you start like a club where they get to talk to each other? Maybe you can help them. And it's like the 5th book is just like Kaladin trying to like help the heralds like gain
it's a
their
big group session. Yeah. Well, what's funny, like when Dalinar brings that up, Kaladin's like, look, he's like, I'm talking to like just normal people, and it's going to take a long time, and you're wanting me to cure these heralds in like 10 days. Yeah. Like that's not going to happen. Like,
I forgot about the 10 days.
And then like the Ishtar character, like the whole time he's like, you're the champion. I'm ready to, take down the champion, and like we're gonna battle, and then then he has this moment of clarity kind of thing where he's
we
need to do this and come find me, and like blah, blah, and then it's right back to I'm gonna kill you, and then it's like
that's the clue. The next book will somehow be reconnecting the perpendicularity to all these.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're right. That was put there for that reason. That's the clue.
And then, of course, when we, talking of the Ishar guy, him making
the mutilated Spren
into physical beings,
that was
odd.
I have no idea what.
I have no idea what that. Because I mean, so you've got, with Raboniel, she's trying to figure out a way to kill Spren, and with some sort of not magic, but sort of magic. And then on this, it's like he's taking a spiritual being and turning it into a physical being. Therefore, that physical being can be killed. And I don't know if that's what he was trying to do. But if that's the case, why was he doing essentially? I mean, I felt like it was a 7th grade science class, and there was a little pig, and he's like,
he's like,
checking it out and everything. What have I done? Let's see what kind of cool stuff that this has created. And
that part was so weird, and
that was weird.
But it has to be setting up for something, and I can't believe that. It's amazing to me how prepared Brandon Sanderson is for the next book as he's writing this one.
Definitely.
Definitely. Because those two items we just talked about, and that whole chapter with Ishar and Dalinar going and visiting him and all that, all of this is setting up for the next book.
Yes,
it serves no purpose in this story.
Right, exactly.
It has to be setting up, and what the heck could it mean? It's so crazy. So,
and then the fact, what was cool about him too is he's describing this battle where he's fighting all these radiants, and he's just toying with them and all this stuff, and the whole powers he has, and the whole time the Stormfather is in Dalinar's head being like, he should be able to do that. He shouldn't be able to do that. How is he doing this? And then then he's like, he's not even one of the better Radiants, or one of the better heralds of fighting. He's just kind of okay, and Dalinar's like, he's okay. Oh my god! And then you find out the best fighter's the crazy dude that's back in, where is he, Eurytheru, or is he at the Shattered Plains? I can't remember wherever he is. It's okay, and obviously they brought that up for a reason too. Why would you throw that out there if there wasn't
I think he's going to end up being, I can't think of his name. The one that shows up at the end of The Way of Kings that you're talking about, that's he's babbling about nothing.
The crazy man.
He is, I think he's going to end up being Dalinar's champion. I think somehow or another they're going to try to work out his sanity somehow, and he's going to end up being Dalinar's champion. So, man, we are deep into the end game stuff, and there's so many characters we didn't cover. There's no way we can cover everything in this book. I think we're going to have to split this into two, but
we haven't even touched on Kaladin.
I was about to say, we have to touch on Kaladin and the Pursuer, Kaladin and Moash,
right?
And of course, Vinley and Eshni. I want to talk about them,
right?
So I gotta tell you, I got a hot take. I'm going to tell you right now that I think that is going to be super unpopular opinion. I did not like the whole Pursuer storyline. I didn't like it. To me, it felt like it was kind of forced. I didn't feel like it was very important. And
I thought it was kind of forced as well.
Also, the whole sort of Stormlight science of it. I don't really understand how it works. How does this Pursuer have these husks?
I was wondering that too. I kept thinking, well, is he taking over
Yeah, it's like he has to jump into someone else's body, but then it's like he can also turn into this blip and go away and then reappear. And it's like, well, then why did he need the other dude's body? Like,
well, that's what.
If he can dematerialize and then materialize it again, then what's the point? Like,
so the whole thing about the fuse is that, you know, their spirit would inhabit one of the singers, and then they would you know, turn into a fused, right? And they would just like the whole part where it all happens with, you know, and Vinley starts this whole thing is that, you know, her friends all died, but their bodies were used as a fused.
Yeah.
But they don't, you know, they don't interchange. But like, so when the pursuer is chasing Kaladin, and like he's here and then turns into light and then he's here.
Yeah.
Like the way I was thinking of the way the fuse work was, if he's here and turns into light and then reappears here, there would have to be
he had to jump
somebody
into another
here
person there. Yeah.
That would be right there where Kaladin is. And so like,
yeah,
where's this body coming from that he's all of a sudden reappearing? Like,
that's exactly, that was exactly my problem with it. I could never figure out how that worked.
And if that's and then if the rules are that, that he can do that, like if he can basically manifest his own body.
Right.
So far, at least, you know, up until now, there's only been one mention of a fuse like this, and it's him.
Yeah.
Like if it's me and I'm Odium and I'm trying to take over the world, all of my fused would be a pursuer type fused, because you would just decimate everybody in, you know, in 5 minutes.
If this were an RTS,
it would be a contest.
You would invest all your credits into building that creature.
Exactly. Like, why would you have all these other, like, I mean, like the ones that could like melt into the rock and do stuff like those are cool.
Yeah.
But like, they don't really serve a purpose in war. Like, if you're trying to defeat heralds and all this stuff, that's how you do it. You don't just create one and be like, I mean, this guy's pretty awesome, but I'm not gonna let's go do all this other stuff.
So, like in Kaladin's storyline in this book, I liked the trauma aspect where he's dealing with the trauma. I liked his. So I didn't really even catch this on the read until afterwards, looking back at it. But like all of the dreams and all that stuff, like that was all like
Moash.
That was all from Moash and Odium. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really didn't even like exactly make that connection. I remember the conversations between Odium and Moash and talking about Moash's connection to him and all this kind of stuff, but it wasn't until, and maybe I should have known that all along, but it wasn't until I kind of read it and then thought back on it. I was like, oh, that's what that was. I liked all of that. I liked the dream sequences. I liked that it was also kind of giving Kaladin a way to, like, you know, live this trauma and to overcome it. I liked that. I even liked that Sanderson tried to like bring Kaladin back to the way of kings by having him lose his powers and have to find new inventive ways.
Right. I did enjoy that.
But yeah, just the pursuer, I just didn't find all that interesting. Kaladin was interesting, and he needed something to
really enjoyed Kaladin in this book, but the whole pursuer. And the one other thing that kind of really struck me about the pursuer was like his whole gist was, you know, I've got this, you know, blood feud thing. Like if I get killed, I'm coming after you to kill you. And he's supposed to be this badass, but the fact that he has this thing where he goes and kills people that have killed him shows that he gets killed fairly often if he's doing this. So like,
I didn't even think about that.
Like what's like,
it kind of sucks.
Exactly. Like he just has to keep coming back and doing this so he can kill somebody. And then
it happens so much that it's like literally his identity.
Yeah, exactly. And so I kept thinking, man, this guy's supposed to be this just OP, like badass guy. Yeah. But yet his basically whole thing is going back and seeking revenge on people that have killed him. And I'm like, so he can't be that much of a badass. He's getting killed all the time.
I didn't even think about that. Oh man, yeah, I thought he was kind of corny. To be honest, very, very, and there's nothing wrong with anime. It's not my thing, but it was very. Right. I've always said these books kind of remind me of like a mix of like fantasy and anime. That was like 100% anime. Like that was. And
he had to have. Kaladin had to have like a nemesis, and obviously this was written as a nemesis because
literally the pursuer. Like, what does he do in this book? He tries to get pursues. Kaladin.
Yeah. They kind of set it up in a similar way, and I definitely think we should save this for another episode. But like, kind of last thing, how Kaladin or how Navani and Rabonio were enemies, but they worked together and they had respect for each other, which is the same thing that Kaladin and Leshway had.
Yeah.
Because I thought that Leshway, the way it started out, was kind of be like his
I thought
his enemy, and that was going to be the whole back and forth. Yeah. But then Leshway, it was just like, behind the scenes fighting against the pursuer and all that stuff.
That probably would have been more interesting, honestly.
Right.
Like, I really like this book a lot. I hate to criticize it, but like that probably would have been more interesting if Leshway had been like essentially the pursuer. Like if Leshway had made it her goal to find Kaladin because he's the only Radiant that still has powers, and maybe she doesn't know about Lift. Which, oh my God, we haven't even thought about Lift. And that
I know, right?
What was in the bag that Murray showed Raboniel?
I know, right?
And so like there is this whole I kept thinking it was like Pulp Fiction, like she opens the bag and the glow comes out.
Are we good? We're good.
But the so like she could have been in place of the pursuer. She could have spent the whole book trying to find Kaladin. The only difference would have been at the end of the book when Vinley reveals to Leshway that she has powers. Instead of Kaladin getting to kill her, it would have like changed. It would have changed enough of the world to her that she would have been like, oh, okay, we're going to fight back now, just as she did in the book. And so the only thing would have been lacking would have been the scene where Kaladin actually gets to kill the pursuer.
Right.
But I think I would have found that dynamic more interesting because Leshway, like, she's a very similar character to Raboniel, just to a different extreme. But like, she's somebody that she's like working the she's working the system, but her ends are to end the war, and so she could have been pursuing Kaladin as like a duty, but also knowing that like I kind of want Kaladin to also be a tool somehow,
Right, exactly.
I think that would have been more interesting, but anyway, they didn't choose to do that, and we got the pursuer, and he's kind of a weird character, and I know
he's dead.
And he's dead, and he died in one book. I mean, that kind of goes to show you that like he was just a story tool.
He was a throwaway character, yeah. But he was a plot device.
Yeah, but like I know there's people out there that like the whole pursuer thing, so I mean, I think that's an unpopular opinion. I don't think
right. I don't know. I mean, like I felt the exact same way. Like, and you know what was weird too that bothered me, and with the pursuer was the audiobook. I didn't like the guy's voice that he did.
Oh,
for the
really?
Pursuer. It got on my nerves too. That kind of made, it was. I don't know. It was just weird.
I did listen to some of those parts, but I think I read a lot of that chunk. But I'll tell you what I did discover, switching back and forth between audiobook and reading it, is the voice for the Stormfather.
Yeah.
I hate listening to the audiobook whenever the Stormfather is talking.
His voice.
But when you read it and you hear it in your own voice, it makes sense. And I think where this comes from is in The Way of Kings, Stormfather almost never talks. He's just like speaking to Dalinar in his dreams. And so that voice made sense. Well, now Dalinar and the Stormfather are having they're carrying on these conversations. And it's like, I can't deal with this dude's voice for this whole conversation.
You ever, the Stormfather voice, I always think of Monty Python. And like anytime they do like a like a play on God. Like there's like this big head with like the old style megaphone.
Yeah.
And that's what I kept thinking is this guy with a big megaphone, Dalinar. And like, why are you talking to me like this? Like now, like, we're here together. Like you don't have to do this big booming, like, I mean, I know you're a storm.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the whole, but like,
whenever I read
we're right there.
When I read it, I just picture it as like any other Spren talking to their, companion.
Because like Syl doesn't go Kaladin, like
right. I have the voice of the wind. But whenever I'm listening to the audiobook, I just have to remind myself like it's just this guy reading it weird.
So like with me, so like with Dark Tower, let's say like I've listened to the Dark Tower and I've read the Dark Tower. Now that I've listened to the Dark Tower, whenever I'm reading the Dark Tower, I hear the voice.
I do it
of those narrators when I'm reading.
I do it with Shallan. I do it with any of the female voices. I hear the female reader.
Right.
I don't do it so much with the male voices, but whenever I'm listening to like Shallan and Devani, I hear that woman's voice, and her last name's Reading, which is hilarious.
I never pay attention to that. That's cool.
So Vinley and Eshonai, all the flashbacks of this book were from Vinley's perspective. There are a few from Eshonai's, especially whenever she meets the humans for the first time. And all of that was like, and I've heard Brandon Sanderson talk about a little bit of, I don't want to say regret, but he was like worried that these would come off. He feels that, I've seen an interview where he's even said that he feels that these are like, the least strong, and he was the most worried about how to write these.
I thought it was really good.
Yeah, I thought they were good too. The fear was, and the fear was that like, well, people already kind of know what happened. So like, I'm going to have to write this in some way where like, maybe you don't know the why things happen. But yeah, I actually, some of them I felt like, okay, let's just get through this. I kind of already knew all that happened, but, it made Vinley so much better of a character. Like,
definitely.
I mean, I really liked Eshonai, whenever they had her.
And I really hope, my hope is that somehow like the way that she ended and died with the Stormfather, like
she gets to see the world.
She gets to see the entire planet. But I hope I would love somehow to see her come back somehow. Like, and it's probably impossible. Mm-hmm. But like, even from the very beginning when her character was introduced in the first book, like I really liked her character.
Yeah.
And then when it came up in this book, I was like, it's like awesome. Like this is, because it felt like her death, as far as in Oathbringer, like I felt like it was kind of a fizzle. Like it was just, there's this battle and then like she goes off the edge and then it's just like nothing else. And I was like, I thought, man, that was a very weird way to end this major characters.
It was. And I think that, I think this might have been a response to that. Like, I don't know that it was.
Maybe so. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, there in the final chat, it's the final chapter. And the final words of the book is from Eshonai's perspective, and she is getting she's fulfilling her moment from the beginning of her story, where she is getting to see what's in the rest of the world outside of what she knows. Right. And I think that that's such a fulfillment of that promise that I don't think we'll see her again.
Yeah, that's why when it ended like that, I was like, oh, because I thought it was. Yeah. I thought when he says I'm going to grant this last thing, I thought it was going to be like she somehow turned into a Spren or something like that, to where she could bond somebody. And I was like, this is going to. Yeah, I thought this is going to be awesome. Like she's going to be able to bond, or like, she's going to bond
How
like
great
Vinley or something.
Right. What if it had turned out that she was Vinley's friend, and that's why she always vibrated instead of speaking to her, you know?
Right. That's what, and so I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome. And then that happened, and I was like, I was sad, but I was like, that was a really cool ending because, like, you know, really her true self was an explorer, not a warrior. And I thought that was really cool.
Like, I thought it was such a great, like, the story of Vinley, like, basically, like, being motivated by jealousy and, like, wanting, like, pursuing this, like, ambition of, like, wanting a grander place in her world.
She wanted recognition and power.
Right,
and she wanted to be the savior of her people. And
leading down this dark path. And, like, you know, she even says that, you know, her spren tries to make her feel, she feels guilty about what happened. Her spren tries to make her feel better by saying, oh, you were under the influence of the void spren or whatever. And she says, like I was influenced, but, like, these were my choices. Like, I made these choices. Like, this was me. And the saddest moment, of the book is whenever, she believes that she let her mother die in the chasm, drowning and confused, not even knowing what is happening to her.
Right.
That's the saddest part of the whole series.
Yeah, that was.
But then in the end, whenever she finds out she's still alive, like, that's like,
and then
such a good payoff for a character that is, like, essentially a villain. You know what I mean? Like,
right, exactly.
I mean, she's, like, trying to correct her course now, and she, you know, she has bonded with a spren, and I think what the story we're going to see unfold is that she becomes an example of, like, you know, like, a way that her people can fight back, that they don't have to go along with odium, that they can bond with spren and they can fight back. Her story didn't start out that way. I didn't see it coming to this moment where she was going to have this redemption, you know, like.
The other crazy thing about that part of the ending was the chasm fiends.
Yeah. I'll tell you what I thought that scene was. And the chasm fiend is cool, but I thought it was going to be what Chiri Chiri is. I thought it was going to be a big dragon, like Kremlin.
A big dragon thing.
Yeah.
That would have been cool too. But, like, one of the really good things that he does with, like the reason I like Vinley and Raboniel and Leshway and those characters, because I thought the same thing going in this book. It was like Rhythm of War. So Rhythm automatically tells you, hey, this book's going to be, like, about, you know, the Barshindi and the Fused and the Singers. And I was thinking, hey, you know, but like, he did a really good job of, like, they were, up until this book, they were like this savage, like,
oh yeah,
you know, the enemy. They're you know, they are this bad. Everyone is bad. Like, there's no redeeming things about these people. They are like these husks of creatures that are just bloodthirsty and blah blah. And then he does such a good job of showing you, like, that there's two sides to every war.
Yeah.
And where the people of Alethkar and basically, like, most of Roshar think that these people are that way, but then you see it from their perspective, and they think, you know, and they actually have good people, and that they view the humans as the way the humans view the, you know, the Fused and everything.
Yeah.
And, like, you start, like, the whole thing, one of the good things about that flashback with Vinley and Eshonai, and especially the mom, is that you see families and you see, like, this, you know, this mother-daughter bonds and, like, the same things that humans deal with, like, you know, wanting power and wanting to save their people, and, like, they weren't coming at this thing in a bloodthirsty way. They were, like, I think the whole thing with Eshonai is that, you know, the whole beginning of that was she wanted to coexist with the humans,
Yeah.
And it was the humans that turned on them.
Mm-hmm.
And, and that's why Vinley started doing what she was doing, is that she recognized that, that Gavilar was not this, grand being, that he was,
I like the warning that Dalinar gives her. So, Dalinar says, like, sure, we're going to bring, good things, but trust me when I say, like, we're going to take far more than we're going to give, and just be prepared for that. Like, he kind of gives her that warning. And, in The Way of Kings, that is the reason I loved The Way of Kings so much when we first read it, was because that is a story about being at war, and the people that are, like, the tiers of people that are kind of like trapped in this. So, like, you had Kaladin in The Way of Kings that, like, was forced to be a part of this, like, economy of war, and he was not profiting from it in any way, but he was part of what other people like Sadeas was. He was part of how Sadeas profited from the war, and they didn't want to end the war. Like, their whole economy is based on this war going on at this point. And then Dalinar is getting these voices that say, like, you should unite them. And he believes that it's asking him to end the conflict and to try to convince, his people to end the conflict. And, like, society is like, that's absurd. Like, we can't end the conflict. Like, you must be crazy, man. And now that we're seeing the other side, and we have Vinley and Eshunai, and these characters, they're in that same situation where there's people that are profiting from this that don't want it to end, and there's people that are stuck in it that just can't, they just want it to end in whatever way it can. I mean, that's a theme, and it's a theme that runs across all the books, but I think this one harkens back to that feeling in The Way of Kings that I had. It's such a,
the way that in Way of King, like the Shattered Plains battles, like, the way he writes it is like, you got this savage people that are like,
they don't even touch on them. It, like, in The Way of Kings, they barely even describe the enemy. You know what I mean?
Right. They're these mysterious, like, hulking forms that are just like, you're thinking, these are,
they're like orcs.
They're like orcs or something. And, like, you come to find out, like, in these flashbacks, like, some of the funny things were, like, the different tribes of the singers would try and take over the cities. And, like, the way he describes, like, that one family that comes in to try to take, they, like, throw spears, but they're not really trying to hurt each other. They're like,
that's right.
It's more like intimidating and, like, hoping somebody gives up. And then, like, that's the people that
the early battles,
the Alethi are fighting. Like, these people that don't do this stuff.
And those early battles in the first book were like sport. I mean, they were like trying to capture the gem heart, like, it was like it was more a sport than it was a war, which goes back to, like, the whole prophet thing. Like, it wasn't,
they tell you why the Alethi are trying to get these gem hearts, because they need the light and do all this. Well, in this book, you find out that the reason that the Parshendi were trying to get it, or the singers were trying to get it, was because that's how they grew their food.
Yeah.
And like, so it's like this whole new perspective, and you're just like basically the Alethi were just attacking these people who weren't warriors, who were simply trying to feed themselves. And, like, the Alethi looked at it as, we're destroying this evil empire of people. And what kills me is that Gavilar and Dalinar had both been to their homes and saw what these people were like.
Oh yeah.
And that didn't change a thing. Like,
it's true.
they still did what they did.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Like I understand Gavilar's motivation, but it's pretty wild that even Dalinar.
Right.
That's
wild. The Dalinar that warns Eshonai.
Yeah.
Seems like a different Dalinar that later then slaughtered, thousands of singers. Like, it was
after they killed his brother.
That's true.
But still, yeah.
He had to have known that these people weren't a warrior nation. They were simple people. And I thought that was, that was a really good use of those flashbacks with Eshonai and stuff.
I'm telling you, after we read the fifth book, we need to go back and read The Way of Kings again.
Right.
So I'm trying to look at what else we got. I'm definitely splitting this into two at this point.
Yeah, we could still talk about Vinley and Eshonai further, and then, like I said, there's still a lot of the Kaladin story, and then we haven't even gotten to Relaine and Renarin and Seth and Lift and Moash and Teft.
I'll tell you what I want to do. I'm not going to make this 2 episodes, but what I want to do, I was going to continue, and maybe if we took 2 hours, I'll break it up into 2, but I think what we should do is try to, in predicting, as we get closer to book 5, and maybe we'll start, making some predictions, and in those predictions, we could try to tackle like a subject, like, what do we think we're going to see from the heralds in book 5? Here's what we know so far about the heralds, and then we kind of discuss that, and then kind of make like a prediction, and then we could do that for several different subjects. Sure. As we get closer to book 5, and then finally we'll read book 5. But I
definitely think we should do, maybe another episode here the next couple days and finish talking about this book. Because there's definitely like I really want to get in. There's a lot about the Kaladin storyline besides the Pursuer that, especially like, all the things with Teft and the Radiance being knocked out and all that stuff. Around. So there's
so much happening in this book. This is by
far, right?
We should do a ranking. Next episode we'll do a ranking of the books. But
yes.
But right now, and maybe it's just because I just finished it and I'm still like, in the throes of it, but right now this is my favorite.
No, definitely. Book. Ranking, definitely this was my favorite. And with Oathbringer, like that, I'll say again, that part 5 of Oathbringer was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Like, fantastic. But like, that was, when I think of Oathbringer, I think of what fantasy is. Like the crazy battles and the magic stuff and like all this stuff. This book was more about people and like characters and like, there was still all the magic stuff, but it wasn't like the dominating thing. Like it was about interpersonal like relationships between good guys and bad guys and like family dynamics and like all this stuff. And it was a breath of fresh air for like what you would think of a fantasy novel. Like, and that's why it was so intriguing to me. Like, just so good. Like, and the whole PTSD thing, like we've talked about, that's like, things like that would come up that like, you don't necessarily see that all the time.
That's the last thing I'll say about Kaladin before ending this episode is like, I didn't dislike Kaladin, but he wasn't my favorite character before. I really saw myself more in Dalinar, which is kind of crazy because he's like this super like,
right.
That's almost that's almost conceited to think of yourself as Dalinar.
Right.
But like this book, like I could relate so much to what Kaladin was going through. I mean, I'm constantly chased by a pursuer, and it's constantly. I'm just kidding. The depression thing in the beginning of the book, where he just was depressed and didn't know why, and it didn't make any sense. And I saw my mom. My whole life, I saw my mom deal with that. There was one time in my life where I dealt with that, and to see a character in a fantasy novel like to so humanly deal with that, I really This book made Kaladin like my favorite character of the series, which normally I don't like those characters. The characters that are like obviously supposed to be your favorite, I normally don't like those characters,
Same. And I thought this book for me, I don't know that he's
I still love
my favorites. But like this book elevated Kaladin a lot for me. So
well, we're gonna have to come back to touch on more. Before we end this episode, do you want to try to decide what we should read next? Because I want to start something tonight or tomorrow.
I've started another book.
Oh yeah, what have you started?
So have you ever heard of Robert McCannon?
Look him up.
I can never remember.
McNamara?
I think it's Mick. Robert McCammon. He is. I've read several of his books, like Swan Song, A Boy's Life, and stuff. And then I read They Thirst. I haven't read it, but I've heard of that book. But I read a book by him. It's called Speaks the Nightbird. Maybe a year or so ago. And like, there's 3 books, I think, that he did. Speaks the Nightbird, the book I'm reading now, which is Queen of Bedlam. And I think there's one more that follow this guy his name's Matthew Corbett. But these books the first book takes place in the Carolinas colonies. This is pre-Revolutionary War stuff.
Oh, wow.
And like, the guy is sort of like he's a clerk for a magistrate, but he's sort of like a detective. And the first book is like, he goes to him and his, he's an apprentice to this magistrate, and they go to this, to the Carolina colonies because they're supposedly a witch. And like, it's this whole like mystery about like, whether she's a witch, and he doesn't believe it, and he's trying to, prove it's really good. And then, it's obviously it's written in like, there's a lot of historical things like the way life was and stuff like that. And then this Queen of Bedlam is like, after that book, he goes to New York, but New York is like essentially just starting. And there's like a killer, so far, like, I guess it's turning into like a serial killer type thing, but like, it's really good. And, so I started reading it because I wasn't sure what we were going to do, but I can do basically anything.
So,
because I can listen or read that and do, because I usually am doing 2 books at a time anyway. So, so I'm so excited for you to read the next Dark Tower book, but I'm also like, don't want to get this whole thing where we're just going back and forth between
Sanderson and Stephen King.
Yeah, and now that Sanderson's done,
we're caught up on Stormlight Archive. We're not going to see anything else for a year. Yeah, I do want to read Mistborn, but I want to take a break. I don't want to read Brandon.
Right.
I don't want to read Sanderson right after this.
The other thing is, one of the harder things that we've been doing is we've been going back and forth between big series.
Yeah.
And so do we want to start another series, or do we want to do single books, or do we like...
Yeah. So I'll tell you,
I read the synopsis kind of thing of that book you were talking about. It sounds really cool. Like, I mean, I'm not lying.
Empire Silence.
Dude, I looked up that book last night and I was like, I wonder what the hardcover they listed on Amazon was like almost $200. I was like,
wow.
what the?
It's kind of hard to find. So
maybe that's why
I ordered this copy, because Books A Million didn't have a physical copy. So I ordered it from Books A Million. In hindsight, I should have just ordered it from Amazon because this one came in kind of messed up. And then I was at Barnes & Noble, and I look for this book almost every time I go to Books A Million or Barnes & Noble. And I was at Barnes & Noble in Greenville, and they had the second book. And so I bought it. I have the second book on the shelf too. So
which I think there's 5 of those books currently, but from what I understand, there's 2 more coming.
Yeah. So the series is, I want to finish the Dark Tower. I don't mind if we read this one next. But I do want to start Empire Silence, and in another series I want to start the Kingkiller Chronicles.
Okay.
I don't know if you know anything about that, but
no.
I've been hearing a lot about the Kingkiller Chronicles. It's 3 books so far. 2 of the books have come out. They've been waiting on the 3rd book for like 10 years.
Oh,
but supposedly it's about to come out. So,
all right, George R. Martin.
Yeah, you're taking an investment here by you're really taking a gamble here. But I changed jobs recently, and someone on the new team that I'm working on, he saw me reading Rhythm of War. He didn't know Rhythm of War, but he said, "Oh, you read fantasy," and he told me about the Kingkiller Chronicles, and he said like they're worth, even if a 3rd book never comes out, they're worth reading. They're really good. So that's the 3 series that I'm interested in reading. But also, like you said, I don't want to just read series, but it's just like, I don't know. I'm just getting the bug of like, I see all these series I see people reading, and I'm kind of like, until last year, I never read unless I had to. I never read fiction at all.
Right.
And so like, this is kind of a new world to me in a way. And like, I'm seeing, all these YouTubers talk about different books, and I'm like, man, I want to try that and try that and try that. And so far so Stormlight Archive was the first one I wanted to try. And then you got me on the Dark Tower, which I always said I don't think I could handle, but I'm glad that I did because it wasn't as bad as I thought. I thought in order to read the Dark Tower, you also had to read all these other Stephen King books for it to make sense, but it doesn't work that way.
No.
And then Empire Silence, I really do want to read. I really do want to read this series eventually, but I understand for the sake of doing a podcast, I don't know that every book we cover should be part of a series. And whenever you're doing multiple series like this, you're constantly jumping back and forth.
Right.
So it's hard not to. I'll tell you another book. There's some Stephen King books, Pet Sematary, and what's the one where he's like, there's a character that's like, he's a writer and he's trapped in a cabin with one of his biggest fans. Misery.
Misery, yeah.
I kind of want to read Misery.
Dude, Misery's so good.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm open for a one-off or picking another series up.
I mean, I think if we do a one-off, for at least now, we pick something non-King.
Non-Stephen King, yeah.
Because I do want to do the Dark Tower, and I don't want it to just, now that we're done with Sanderson, it just turn into a Stephen King podcast.
It's got so many classic books that I've never read.
I know, right? Yeah. So one thing I will suggest is when we do Wizard and Glass, when we're done with Wizard and Glass, do maybe Salem's Lot, because Salem's Lot's
another one, that I want to read.
Will come up in the book following.
Okay.
And it's not, again, you could not read it and it would be fine because like it explains itself, but it would be kind of a cool break. But yeah, I mean, I know what happens in the Dark Tower, so I'm like, I'm always gonna, fall back to, we should do the Dark Tower. But
I mean, it's a long book, but honestly, all of these have gone fast.
Yes, They have.
They're easy to get through. Like, I don't know how.
This one is a really good read too, because it's almost two stories in one. Because you got what's the current thing, and then it's a lot of flashback about Roland in his early years.
I say let's do Wizard and Glass. Let's do Wizard and Glass. And then after Wizard,
here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get the Empire
of Silence.
Empire of Silence too, because I've got like 4 credits on Audible.
Okay.
And I might, as soon as I finish the book I'm listening to now, I'm just going to go ahead and start the Empire of Silence, and then by the time we're done with Wizard and Glass, we can basically jump right into that.
Yeah, I've
read, ready.
I read 3 chapters of this so far, and what I've been doing is I have a fall asleep book. I usually listen to a book falling asleep that's not one of the books that we're doing for the podcast, because it takes me a really long time to get through the fall asleep book, because I fall asleep. I listen to the same chapter like 5 nights in a row.
Right.
And so I have listened to 3 chapters of this book over the course of like 2 weeks.
Right.
So I don't know, maybe I'll physically read one and listen to the other, and that way I can do it both at the same time. But the reason why I don't typically do that is because you're so much faster than me that if I don't, I have to read and listen to the same book in order to keep up with you.
Yeah. So okay, we'll start. I'm gonna physically read Wizard and Glass. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, we'll start that, and then like I said, I'll go ahead and get that other book too, and then we'll get together again soon and do another Rhythm of War episode, and then we'll jump into the following episode to Wizard and Glass.
Have you listened to any samples of Empire of Silence?
Nah.
It has a really distinct audio. The reader is really distinct.
Okay.
Could be good, could be bad. I didn't like it at first.
Right.
But the more I listened to it, it kind of grew on me. I kind of dig it now. But it's very distinct. Some people would rather read it than do the audiobook. It's just he's a very astute, like proper sounding, like very, but it fits the character, because the character is that too. So it's probably done intentionally.
Right.
That guy probably doesn't talk that way all the time. All right. Well, let's close this bad boy out. We'll do another Stormlight episode soon. We need to do another just like catch up in news, because we're not going to get through this before the next episode. So we'll have a few content episodes, and I'm also excited to jump back into to this universe. So
you're going to be pleasantly surprised.
Very happy to do it.
All right. Well, everyone, thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. We'll see you next week, and peace.
Peace out.